In the last session, we began to do two main things: to describe the language of I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, and to account for this poem's powers to provide us with a wide range of experiences. In particular, we began to describe the sounds of the words of the poem and to observe how those sounds affect our response to it. We observed that the language of the poem displays a regularity in the sequence of stressed and unstressed syllables. And we describe this regularity by saying the lines are in iambic tetrameter. The meter of the poem is iambic tetrameter, though there are a few irregularities. A few lines begin with trochaic or spondaic feet. But the prevailing sequence of stressed and unstressed syllables can be described as iambic tetrameter. There are 4 iambic feet per line, where each foot is defined by an unstressed to stressed sequence. We also observe that most of the lines in the poem are end-stopped lines, though there is also some enjambment in the poem. These features of the language of the poem, we said, account in part for the poem's ability to provide the pleasures of sensation, right? The pleasure of just hearing the words. These features also, I think, enter into the poem's capacity to come across to us as an expression of Wordsworth's feelings. And they enter into the poem's powers to evoke feelings in those who read and hear the poem. In this session, I just want to enrich further our vocabulary for describing the sounds of poetry. There's a lot more to say about the sounds of Wordsworth's words. So in this session, I want to establish a vocabulary for doing that. And then in the following session, we will use this vocabulary to describe the sounds of Wordsworth's language and understand what it is about those sounds that qualifies the poem to provide us with special experiences. So there is a special vocabulary that comes from a branch of linguistics called phonetics. Not a lot of literary people use this vocabulary, but I think it is extremely helpful for those of us who want to describe and understand the sounds of poetry. This vocabulary derives from terms used to describe the parts of our body that come into play when we produce the sounds of language. So we need to begin by identifying these parts of our body. That's right, we're going to begin the session by having a little anatomy lesson. Now think about how we usually produce the sounds of English words. Think about what is going on in your body when you speak English. I think essentially we produce spoken words in the English language and in many others, essentially by using our lungs, right? We inhale, and then we use our lungs to propel the air we have inhaled out from the lungs up through our throat and our larynx, our voice box, and out of our mouth and nose. Now I want to get a little more specific than this. So allow me to ask you to stick out your tongue a little bit and press it upwards against your upper lip like this. Now, if your mouth is like my mouth, and if you draw your tongue in a little bit, right, pushing it upwards still, but drawing it back a bit, and push the tip of your tongue upwards, I think you'll feel your teeth, right, the sharp ends of your upper teeth, and then the back of your teeth. And if you continue to draw the tip of your tongue in and also push it upwards, you will soon feel a hard ridge-like part on the top of your mouth, which we call the alveolar ridge. The alveolar ridge. So you're pressing your tip of your tongue up against your alveolar ridge, and if you keep going, drawing it back further and pushing your tip of your tongue upwards, you'll then feel, I think, a smooth, relatively hard, concave surface, which we call the hard palate. Okay, so the tip of your tongue is pushing up right against the roof of your mouth, right? That hard palate. And if you keep going, curling the tip of your tongue back and pushing it upwards, you'll feel a softer, smooth concave surface, which we call the soft palate or velum. Now, let me just show a little graphic representation of our mouth in order just to get more clear about the parts of the mouth that we use and the vocal tract that we use in order to produce sound. So as you can see, the lips and then the teeth, the alveolar ridge is right around there. Then the hard palate, and further back along the top of our mouths is the velum, right? And notice also the larynx, that's the term used to refer to the whole vocal box, voice box, and that includes our vocal cords, as well as the glottis, which is, the term glottis is usually used to refer to an opening between the vocal cords, which are housed in the voice box or the larynx. Now that we have a few terms to describe the parts of the body we use to produce the sounds of English, we can get to the vocabulary that is used to describe the sounds of poetry. Now, there are two main kinds of sound in spoken English, vowels and consonants, as we have mentioned before. And I want to get more clear about the difference between them. We'll begin with consonants and then move to vowels. Consonants are sounds that we produce by constricting or impeding in a significant way the air that we expel from our lungs. But the important thing here is that we can constrict or restrict or impede that air in many different ways by using different parts of our throat, mouth, and nose. And we can identify different consonants by way of terms that identify these different ways of impeding or constricting the airflow from our lungs. Now, I just want to introduce this vocabulary to you and use some of the terms that I find most useful for describing the sounds of Wordsworth's poem and poetry in English in general. So a couple very useful terms, basic terms, which we can use to describe consonants, are voiced and unvoiced. Think of the difference between the Z sound, the beginning sound in ziba, and the S sound in the word sign. In the first case, notice that we use our voice to produce the sound. Right? If you feel your larynx, your voice box here, you can feel the vocal cords vibrate when you say zzz. But when you say the S in sign, right, you don't use those vocal cords. So we say that the Z sound is a voiced consonant because we are using our vocal cords. But the S sound in sign is an unvoiced consonant. And that's one reason the first sound, that Z sound, may come across as being a little more forceful, a little stronger than the second. Because in the first one, we're using our vocal cords, it's voiced. And in the second one, we're not using our vocal cords. It is an unvoiced consonant. Now, a second set of terms, they're fairly basic terms as far as the linguistic vocabulary goes, but again, I find them very useful. Think of the difference between the B sound in bail and the V sound in veil, a word which occurs in Wordsworth's poem. Notice that in the first case, we stop the flow of air completely and then allow it to exit our mouths. The sound is instantaneous and has no or very little duration. B, bail, B. But in the second case, we only partially impede the air. It's not entirely stopped and then released. It doesn't explode from our mouths. And the word plosive is another term for stop. Plosive is nice because it goes to that sense of allowing the air to explode from our mouth. When we stop the air, and release it, it can have the sense anyways of exploding from our mouth. But with the V in veil, think about the V in veil. We're only partially impeding the air from exiting our mouth. And we do so over more time with a kind of turbulence. So the first type of consonant, the B in bail, is a stop or a plosive consonant. While the second type of the second consonant, as in the V sound in veil, we refer to as a fricative consonant. Now, two more basic terms for describing consonants, discriminating between types of consonant. Think about the difference between M in mother and B in bail. In the first case, our mouths, notice that our mouths are closed throughout the entire pronunciation of the consonant. So the air cannot pass out through our mouth, but must pass out through our nasal cavity and nose. Mother. Once we get to the vowel, we open our mouths, but notice that in order to pronounce that M sound, we keep our mouths closed, and the air is exiting our body by way of the nose. Whereas in B, as we have noticed, we stop the air totally, and then we allow the air to exit through our mouth. So the M, there's something unusual, something distinctive about that M sound in mother, because we're preventing the air exiting our body by way of the mouth and forcing it to exit by way of the nasal cavity out our nose. So that first one is called a nasal consonant, whereas the second one, bail, and most of the other consonants are oral consonants, since we are allowing the air sooner or later in some manner or another to exit our bodies by way of the mouth, the oral cavity. So just a few terms, 6 terms, which I think go a long way to improving our articulateness in relation to describing the sounds of words and describing the sounds of poetry. Voiced and voiceless, a stop and a fricative, a nasal and an oral. Now, I just want to indicate to you that if we want to, we can get even more precise. And we can do that essentially by identifying what parts of the mouth we're using to restrict or stop the airflow from our body. So notice that the B in boy, it's a voiced stop consonant, right? We're using the voice and we're stopping the air totally before releasing it. So it's voiced consonant. But notice that we stop the air with our lips. B. That's the part of the mouth we're using to stop the air. And so we can also say that this is a bilabial voiced plosive consonant. Consider the T in torrent. Now it's an unvoiced, right? When you pronounce the T, notice, do you use your voice when you pronounce that T? T, t. I don't think so. Tip. Eventually your voice comes into it as soon as you get to the vowel, but I think the T, you don't need to use your voice in order to pronounce that sound. It's a plosive, the air is totally stopped, and so it's plosive, so it's an unvoiced plosive. But notice we're stopping the air in a way that is different from the way we stop the air when we pronounce the B in boy. In this case, we have our tongue up against the alveolar ridge. We're using our tongue and the alveolar ridge of our mouths to stop the air. And so we can refer to, we can identify this fact, we can specify and be articulate about this fact of our pronunciation by referring to this consonant as an alveolar unploiced plosive. One final example, going further back in the mouth. Think about the sound G in give or God. I've always thought the word God has a certain kind of strength and power and authority to it. I think it's in part because of the kind of consonant the word God begins with. The same consonant as in give, right? It's voiced, G. You're using your voice, we're using our voice. It's a plosive, we stop the air and then it explodes. So it's a voiced plosive. But in this case, We're stopping the sound by holding the back of our tongues up against the soft palate or the velum. And so we can indicate this fact. We can precisely identify this sound by saying that it's not just a voice plosive, but it's a velar voiced plosive, which means that we are using, right, we're really producing, stopping that sound from the back of our mouths, deep down, starting to go down the throat. Now let's go to vowels. We produce vowel sounds by expelling the air out of our lungs and allowing it to exit our mouths without impeding or constricting or restricting it in any significant way. Now, a few, right, as opposed to like restricting it or stopping it entirely as we do when we're producing consonants, with vowels, we pretty much just let it flow out, the air flow out. Now, a few important basic features to observe about pronounced vowels. I think almost all of them are voiced. There are a few weird, exceptional situations, including whispering. But when we're speaking English, everyday English, pretty much all of the vowels are voiced. Notice also that most vowels can have duration and do have duration. And they can be drawn out over time, whereas many consonants do not and cannot be drawn out over time. Whereas you cannot pronounce the P in pin over time, right? It's just an instantaneous explosion of sound. P, pin. You can pronounce the A in take over an extended period of time. You can draw it out. A fact about vowels, which is very important to people who compose music, when they're setting language to music, right? It's very important that you can extend some vowels over long periods of time. There are, though, you can do this with some consonants as well. L in swell, w in blow, consonants which are kind of close to vowels, but some consonants do have duration. But many consonants, such as that P in pit, plosive consonants, do not have duration, whereas pretty much all vowels do have some duration. Now, the differences between vowels are produced mainly by different durations and differences in the position of the tongue and the part of the tongue that is involved in pronouncing those sounds. So really just a few terms which I think help us just achieve a superior level of articulateness when we're talking about the sounds of English, superior to what an everyday person who hasn't acquired special vocabularies can do when it comes to describing sounds. So there's long and short ones. Most vowels have some duration, as I mentioned, but some vowels are longer than others. A long vowel is of greater duration than a short vowel. Hence, seem, the E in seem, and the U in to are long vowels. Examples of short vowels would be the E in echo. You can still draw it out, but right, generally when people pronounce that word echo, the E in echo is shorter than the E in seem. The E in echo is shorter than the E in seem. The I in swift is shorter than the U in to. So some vowels are short, some are long. Some vowels are high, some vowels are mid, some vowels are low. A high vowel is one where we allow the air to flow out of the mouth while we hold the tongue high in the mouth. Hence, the I in pit. Say pit and see where your tongue is. Feel where your tongue is. Say E in beat. B. Your tongue is pretty high in your mouth. So it's a high vowel. A mid vowel, it follows, is produced when we hold our tongue, or when our tongue is held midway in the mouth. So say the word pet. Pet. Your mouth, I think, is probably where it is. When I say it, my mouth is in the middle, pretty much in the middle of the mouth. Port. O in port. Is your tongue in the middle of the mouth? Middle of your mouth? This is mine anyway. A low vowel is produced by allowing the air to flow out of the mouth while the tongue is held low in the mouth. Hence, the A sound, the ah sound in spa. Right? Notice your tongue now is at the near the bottom of your mouth. Palm, at least when I think most speakers pronounce that word, their tongue is in the bottom of the mouth, as it is in when we pronounce that ah sound in palm, palm. Now, vowels can also be front, central, and back. Right, the tongue can be high or low. It can be, the tip of your tongue can be at the front of your mouth, or it can be more at the back of your mouth. So a front vowel, and when you say pit, right, the tip of your tongue is pretty close to the front of your mouth. When you say the A sound in Camilla, your tongue is slightly moving towards the center of your mouth. And then in put, notice that there your tongue has receded, withdrawn further back into your mouth. Finally, just one final term in connection with vowels is diphthong. Sometimes we move from one vowel to another. So consider the word sound. Right, we begin with ow, and then we move to another vowel sound, ound, sound. Consider the sounds of boy, oi, oi. You begin with o, and then you move to more of an e sound, e, boy. Or surprise, surprise, I-E, surprise. Right, diphthongs. Diphthongs are where we begin with one vowel sound and gradually move to another, which means that often they have a greater duration than a pure vowel. Now, those are just a few terms which I think go a very long way to improving our ability to describe with precision the sounds of words. Right? When we're talking about, it's helpful to distinguish, first of all, between consonants and vowels, sounds which are produced by some sort of restriction of air, and sounds which we produce by allowing the air to exit our mouths without any restriction, pretty much no restriction at all. When we want to describe consonants, right, we can use these words. Voiced, is it voiced or unvoiced? Is it a plosive or is it a fricative? Is it a nasal sound? Are we preventing the sound from coming out of the mouth and forcing it out through our nose? Or is it an oral sound? Is the sound eventually being made by way of our mouth? When it comes to vowels, we can have long or short ones, right? Fairly straightforward distinction, just has to do with duration. Is it relatively short period of time or a long period of time to produce that sound? Is it high, mid, low? Is our tongue high in our mouths when we're pronouncing it as an it, or is it low as an oh? Is our tongue, the tip of our tongue near the front of our mouth, or are we holding it further back? And then a diphthong. A diphthong is really, especially as we'll see, I hope, when we get to Wordsworth, it's an important aspect of some combinations of vowels. Now, all of these terms and definitions are provided. I have provided them in a document, PDF document, which I've drawn up, which is available just below this video. Also, I want to note there's, it's great. The IPA, the International Phonetic Association, has a great website, which I've given on this slide. If you go to that website, you can see the identification and description of all of the sounds of spoken English and other languages. And you can also click on each particular vowel or consonant and hear how that consonant is pronounced, how it sounds. You can have hours of fun, as I do. On the IPA sound chart, I'm getting clear about the symbols that are used to represent sounds and the sounds themselves. Now, I know this is all quite a bit to take in at one time, I think. I do encourage you to just take a bit of time to uh, maybe go over this video and look at that document I just mentioned. So I'm going to leave it at that for this session. In the next session, I hope to show you the benefits of mastering this vocabulary. I will try to show how we can use these terms in order to describe the sounds of poetry and to account for some of their effects. And I will do this by continuing to attend to the Wordsworth poem.